Picture this. Millions of people around the world hang this painting in their homes. On mugs, on posters, on Valentine's Day cards. It's considered the warmest, safest image of love in the entire history of art. But what if I told you the woman in this painting isn't melting into an embrace? She's frozen on the edge of a cliff. And the kiss everyone admires so much might not actually be happening at all. Look closely. Her hand is clenched, tense. Her toes are twisted unnaturally, almost rooted into the ground. Her head is tilted back at an angle that would be physically uncomfortable to hold. This isn't the body of a woman melting with tenderness in her lover's arms. This is a body frozen in tension, right on the edge. Today, I'm breaking down a painting you've probably seen hundreds of times, but never actually looked at. And by the end of this, you may never see it as just a pretty postcard again. This is The Kiss, painted by Austrian artist Gustav Klimt between 1907 and 1908. The canvas is nearly a perfect square, 180 by 180 centimeters, and today it hangs in Vienna's Belvedere Palace, one of Austria's most important museums. The first thing that hits you is the gold. There's so much of it that you can't help but think of a religious icon rather than early 20th century painting. And that's no accident. Klimt's father worked as a goldsmith and engraver, and gold had fascinated the artist since childhood. It was already glowing in his earlier work, like Judith, painted in 1901. But the real turning point came in 1903, when Klimt travelled to the Italian city of Ravenna and saw early Christian Byzantine mosaics with his own eyes. Their flat, blinding shimmer struck him so deeply that a new kind of gold entered his painting. No longer just a shine on fabric, but a self-contained, otherworldly space where the figures seem to dissolve. In The Kiss, this gold gathers around the lovers' heads like a halo, and the figures feel less like a couple in a meadow and more like two saints pulled straight off an icon. Now look at their clothing. Klimt speaks to us here through pattern, and it's not just decoration. He gives the man hard, angular rectangles, dark, almost geometrically rigid. The woman gets soft, flowing ovals and circles scattered with flowers. These aren't borrowed symbols from some existing visual language. Klimt invented them himself, as if pulling them straight out of the subconscious. For the artist, the rectangle carried an unmistakably masculine, almost bodily meaning. In another of his famous paintings, Danae, a single black rectangle reads unambiguously as a phallic symbol. Here, in The Kiss, that same pattern spreads across the man's entire cloak, becoming a metaphor for his force, his drive. The woman's dress, by contrast, comes alive with soft, oval shapes, a symbol of yielding, of dissolving. And yet, there's barely any real human body on this canvas. The figures are wrapped, buried inside decorative patterns so thick we can barely sense living flesh beneath them. This is one of the central paradoxes of Klimt's work. Even as he makes sensuality and the body his main subject, he carefully masks it, hides it behind ornament, as if afraid of showing too much. But the faces are different. Here, Klimt allows himself almost documentary precision. The woman faces us nearly head-on, yet her body lies almost horizontal, sagging in the man's arms. And in that, you can read her passivity, her submission to what's happening. Her eyes are closed, her face turned inward, as though she's somewhere far away from this moment. Her fingers barely, delicately touch his hand. His neck, meanwhile, stretches forward and arches sharply toward her face, a movement that carries both physical force and the full tension of desire. Both figures wear a kind of crown, dark leaves on his head, bright flowers on hers. So who are these two people? This is where one of the painting's biggest mysteries begins. For years, many have wanted to see Klimt himself in this couple, paired with his longtime companion, Emilie Flöger, an independent, successful fashion salon owner in Vienna who stayed by his side until his death. One theory holds that The Kiss is a hidden, coded self-portrait of the artist with his lover, a kind of confession disguised as symbolist painting. But here's what's strange for such an ambitious, large-scale work. Not a single preparatory sketch for the composition has survived. For a painting of this stature, that's almost unheard of. Usually, dozens of studies would exist for something this significant. So there's simply no proof for the theory, and the identity of the lovers remains an open question. What we do know for certain is this. Klimt had been working on the theme of the kiss since as early as 1902, long before this final version. The motif itself grew out of European symbolism and echoes a painting by the same name by Norwegian artist Edvard Munch, painted in 1897, which itself traces back to a sculpture with the same title by Auguste Rodin. In Munch's version, the couple merges into a single dark, shapeless mass, and the lovers' faces bleed into one another in an almost unsettling way, as if literally devouring each other. Klimt's version is far more ornate, more golden, more decorative. But if you trust this symbolist reading, all that serenity suddenly turns into something unsettling. In this interpretation, we're looking at a faceless man, stripped of individuality, losing himself to passion. He's being pulled in and consumed by an indifferent, seductive femme fatale, that iconic figure of the late 19th century, dragging him toward the edge of an abyss. And look closely at exactly where the lovers are standing. Their knees press into a tiny, narrow strip of ground, almost like a small pedestal floating in emptiness. And right beside them, just inches away, there's a sheer drop. Suddenly, all that serenity feels precarious, unstable. This anxiety didn't come from nowhere. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a period of enormous social change. The new woman was stepping onto the historical stage, educated, independent, demanding equal rights. For many male artists of the time, this shift triggered an almost superstitious fear of female power, one that spilled out into countless images of dangerous, destructive seductresses. But there's a completely opposite, much brighter reading of the painting too. One influential Viennese critic saw not a trap in the kiss, but a triumph of love. He recalled the myth of the goddess Hera embracing her husband on a sacred mountain, flowers blooming beneath her feet as she did. In this reading, Klimt's lovers are dressed in ceremonial robes, as if for a celebration of love rather than a secret encounter. A similar, brighter theme had appeared in Klimt's work before, in his famous Beethoven frieze, where an embracing couple beneath the words "a kiss for the whole world" symbolized humanity's salvation through love and art. So what are we really looking at? Ruin or redemption? A trap or a celebration? Klimt deliberately never gives us a clear answer, and maybe that's exactly where his artistic power lies. He fits both bliss and the abyss into the very same frame, refusing to pick a side. There's one more interpretation, perhaps the most haunting and poetic of them all. The Roman poet Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, tells the myth of the god Apollo, who fell in love with a nymph named Daphne and chased her through the forest. Fleeing him, exhausted, she begged her father, a river god, for help, and right before Apollo's eyes, she transformed into a laurel tree. And there's one moment in this myth that artists almost never chose to depict. Apollo embracing the already half-wooden, frozen Daphne and kissing her, while the tree does not respond. Ovid puts it bluntly: the god showers the wood with kisses, and the wood rejects them. Some art historians see exactly this scene of transformation in Klimt's The Kiss, and the details seem to play right along with that reading. The man's head is crowned with laurel leaves, Apollo's signature attribute, not just a generic lover's symbol. The woman's body is unnaturally elongated across the canvas, and her fingers and toes seem to reach downward into the earth, like roots taking hold, almost exactly the way Daphne's fingers are carved in Bernini's famous sculpture, capturing the nymph mid-transformation into a tree. There's no way to prove this reading with absolute certainty. Klimt himself left no direct statement about it. But even as a hypothesis, it lands remarkably close to the emotional core of the painting, because in Ovid's telling, this is a kiss that never truly happened, an embrace that went unanswered. And here's a detail that almost everyone misses when all they see is gold and tenderness. Look again at the kiss itself, right at its center. It's strange, unfinished. With her eyes fully closed and her body in that unnatural, almost limp position, the woman looks less like someone consumed by passion and more like someone lifeless. She doesn't physically respond to the embrace. Her fingers barely, almost ghost-like, brush against his hand, never gripping, never holding on. One scholar of Klimt's work put this observation especially well, and especially uncomfortably. The couple is physically intertwined, tightly bound together. Yet the kiss itself, if you look closely, never quite seems to happen. Their union looks less like something lived and more like something only imagined, an ideal the artist conceived but never let his figures actually experience. And that's the central paradox of the whole painting. Perhaps the most famous kiss in the history of art is, in fact, a painting about a kiss that isn't there. The painting was first shown publicly in 1908 at a major Vienna exhibition called the Kunstschau. In the official exhibition catalogue, it was listed under a far more modest title, Lovers. It also had a third, now nearly forgotten name, The Garden of Love. There's a curious detail here too. The painting arrived at the exhibition technically unfinished. A letter to the Austrian ministry, which was in the process of acquiring the work for the state collection, explicitly states that the lower left corner of the composition still needed work. And indeed, Klimt kept returning to what looked like a finished painting, reworking the flowers in the meadow beneath the lover's feet, the position of her hand, the shape of her feet, small details in the clothing's pattern. Critics split into two camps. Some called it the peak of decadent, artificial excess. One Viennese caricaturist mocked the whole thing, joking that it was impossible to tell whose feet were whose. Others saw the kiss as Klimt's greatest achievement, the triumphant culmination of his entire golden period. But even before the exhibition closed, the Austrian state purchased the painting for the Vienna gallery. Many at the time read this as a kind of belated apology to the artist. Just a few years earlier, Klimt had been commissioned to paint murals for the University of Vienna, only to have the finished work publicly rejected, with university faculty openly attacking him in the press. So, now that you know the whole story, what do you actually see when you look at the kiss? A hymn to eternal, triumphant love, frozen in gold forever? Or an embrace on the very edge of a cliff, one that was never, ever answered?